Chapter 11. "Not be here for Christmas?" Lady Matlock repeated what Darcy had just said. "But we're always together for Christmas. It is tradition." "I have promised my help to a friend," Darcy smiled, "which is not the only compelling reason to be in Hertfordshire." "But it is Christmas," Lady Matlock argued. Elizabeth pulled the left corner of her lip between her teeth and looked from the man whom she wished to have with her in Hertfordshire to his aunt, who would clearly be disappointed if he were not here, in town at Matlock House. "Georgiana is going with me. I do not wish to be separated from her for this holiday." Darcy reclined in his chair, cradling in his hand the glass that held what remained of his wine. He cast a glance in Richard's direction. "I have asked Richard to accompany me." "My son? You would take my son from me at Christmas?" "Not without good reason," Darcy said softly. "Mr. Wickham is in Hertfordshire," Georgiana interjected. Lady Matlock, who had been poised to protest Darcy's reason, snapped her mouth closed. "Is it safe to take Georgie?" Viscount Windermere asked. "With Richard as an escort, I see no need to fear," Darcy answered. "With any luck, just the knowledge that your brother is in Hertfordshire will send Wickham scurrying into some hole to hide." Wickham knew that while Darcy would not call him out, Richard was not above taking such a risk, or, at the very least, attempting to find a way within the laws of the land to make Wickham's life miserable. The Viscount allowed Darcy's answer to be true. "Perhaps you could join Bingley after Christmas," Elizabeth offered. "No," Georgiana said with a firm shake of her head. "That will not do." "Are you certain?" Elizabeth asked in surprise. "I would very much dislike being the cause of a less than joyful holiday for your family. I know mine, or at least my mother's side of the family, has always gathered at Longbourn, although it is only my aunt and Uncle Gardiner who have to travel to be with us." "Not your father's family?" Viscount Windermere asked. "They are estranged," Elizabeth answered. She smoothed the cloth that lay on her lap. "They did not approve of my mother." She could feel her cheeks growing warm. "Her father was a tradesman, as is my Uncle Gardiner." "Ah, so that is how you know it is just as unpleasant to be pursued for your wealth and status as it is to be cast aside for lack of the same," said Richard. Elizabeth nodded. "My father would never admit it, but I believe he felt the disapproval quite strongly." "Your father?" Richard asked in surprise. "I thought you were referring to your mother's not being accepted." Elizabeth smiled. "There is that too. However, it is my father of whom I was speaking. Not that he did not have wealth or standing, but that his choice of bride did not." She looked from Richard to Darcy, and tears unexpectedly gathered in her eyes. He had fled Hertfordshire because he feared being cast aside as her father had been. She blinked and lowered her eyes to her plate. "There is more on which I based my comments, I suppose. Though I am not penniless, I have no fortune, and I have ties to trade. I know that does not make me a favourable match for many." "You're a gentleman's daughter," Lord Matlock said. "That is all that matters to me. That and how much my nephew seems to love you." Elizabeth gave him a grateful smile as her cheeks grew rosy, and his wife scolded him softly for having spoken of Darcy's feelings. "I do love her," Darcy said, drawing the attention of the table. "However, you're speaking as if things have been settled between us. They have not been, which is why I would like to spend Christmas in Hertfordshire." He glanced at his aunt. "It is not because I wish to be separated from you. It is just that I—" His voice failed him as he saw the smile that shone in Elizabeth's eyes. "Then you may borrow my son," his aunt replied. "Now, if everyone has finished eating, I would suggest we retire to the drawing-room. You men can drink your port there. We ladies will not mind. However, you must keep your conversation to acceptable topics." She skewered her husband with a pointed look. "Yes, my lady," he replied with a chuckle as he rose from his chair. "Darcy, see that your aunt reaches the drawing-room unscathed. I would like to escort Miss Elizabeth." Elizabeth took the Earl's hand and allowed herself to be led from the room. "We will take a turn of the drawing-room while the rest are getting the card tables arranged," he said, patting her hand where it lay on his arm. "I would like to meet your father." "You would?" Elizabeth asked in surprise. "Yes, I would like to meet both your father and the rest of your family." They took several silent steps before he asked, "Why do you look so troubled?" Elizabeth, who had been pondering her mother's exuberant response to meeting an earl, and her younger sister's giggling, blew out a breath. "I am not a good match for him." "I beg your pardon?" She drew a breath and then began her reply. "My lord, along with having no fortune and ties to trade, my family is not what it should be." He turned her from the card tables and led her back into the hall. "I feel we are not ready to pick up our cards yet," he explained. "Please, continue. I am very much interested in why you feel that your family is not what it should be." "Mr. Darcy is so." She paused, searching for the right word. "Dignified. He has been raised to greatness." She shook her head. "I have not been." "That tells me naught of your family," Lord Matlock prodded. "My father's estate is modest. It produces well, but I am nearly certain it could produce better." She sighed. "And my mother." She shook her head. "I love her, but she's not always sensible, and my younger sisters are rather silly because of it." She shook her head again. "Mr. Darcy could do far better than me." "I see," Lord Matlock said, as they reached the end of the hall and turned to make the return trip to the drawing-room. However, instead of continuing to walk, he stopped and motioned to a couch that stood along the wall under a beautiful painting of an outdoor scene. "It may come as a surprise to you, Miss Elizabeth, but my mother was not the most sensible woman either. She would prattle on for hours about the most inane things and insist on the most absurd strictures at times. I had 2 sisters. Darcy's mother, Anne, was sweet as could be, and not at all like my mother. However, my sister Catherine is the very image of our mother. And my brother?" He grimaced and shook his head. "He was happy to go to sea to be away from both Catherine and our mother. He was sensible to a fault at times, and yet unyieldingly foolish at others." He covered her hand with his. "When my sister discovers Darcy is marrying you—" He held up a hand to stop her protest. "I realise you're not yet betrothed, but you will be," he assured her with a squeeze of her hand. "As I was saying, when Catherine realises that Darcy is not marrying her daughter, she will likely put on a demonstration that would make anything your mother could do pale in comparison. She has said for years that Darcy would marry Anne, and no matter how many times Darcy's parents or I myself refuted it, she would not listen." He smiled. "Did I mention she's not always sensible?" Elizabeth nodded. Darcy's uncle was a surprisingly easy person with whom to speak. She felt as at ease sitting here with him, as she did her own uncle. "I say all this, Miss Elizabeth, to assure you that your family will not offend me." "And what of my ties to trade?" "You're a gentleman's daughter," Lord Matlock replied. "But my uncle and aunt are very dear to me." The look he gave her when she said this was understanding. "Do you fear not being permitted to see them?" She shrugged. "I had thought all gentlemen, especially those with titles, wanted nothing to do with men of trade." He squeezed her hand again and smiled. "And what is Bingley? Besides a most amiable man, and Darcy's particular friend, he is not yet a gentleman, is he?" A smile spread across her face as she laughed lightly at her own foolishness. "In addition to that, my brother did not go to sea on a naval ship, but on a merchant one. He is in India." He chuckled. "I see I've shocked you. It was quite the scandal." He stood and drew her to her feet. "Miss Elizabeth," he said as they began walking, "I will be delighted if you choose to join your family with mine. Darcy deserves to be loved. That is the only requirement that I will leave with you to consider when you are deciding whether or not to accept his offer, when he finally gets around to making it. If you do not love him, then you are not a good match for him. However, if you do love him, then there can be no better match." He patted her hand. "Are we agreed?" "Yes." Again, Elizabeth pondered that word love as she had in her aunt's sitting room earlier today. "Then," she said softly, as her heart beat a loud and rapid rhythm in her chest, "I am a good match for him." "I'm glad to hear it," Lord Matlock said, with another pat for Elizabeth's hand. "Ah, see, I knew it would happen." He chuckled and nodded toward the drawing-room door from which Darcy had just exited. "I knew he would come looking for you," he whispered to Elizabeth. Then, raising his voice as Darcy approached, he said, "I can see my services are no longer needed." He lifted Elizabeth's hand from his arm and held it out to Darcy. "We can play a person or two short. Take a walk, show her the library." Darcy looked uncertainly from Elizabeth to his uncle. Lord Matlock shrugged. "Leave the door open if you must." He smiled at Elizabeth. "I think Miss Elizabeth could use a few more minutes to collect herself after our discussion. He clapped Darcy on the shoulder and took his leave. "Are you well?" Darcy asked as they walked toward the grand staircase. "I am," she answered. "The library is just behind the dining room," he explained to Elizabeth as they began descending the stairs. "You do not mind going there, do you?" He glanced at her. He did not wish to put her in a place where she was uncomfortable, no matter what his uncle suggested. "No, I love libraries." "But we are unaccompanied," he cautioned. Elizabeth's cheeks coloured, and she carefully watched where she was walking. "We were given permission." She peeked up at him. "Would you rather not go to the library? We can return to the drawing room." He shook his head. "I would always much rather go to the library than the drawing room," he said with a smile. "The library here is among my favourite rooms." "Is it indeed? Pray tell. Which other rooms are on your list of favourites?" she teased. "The library at Darcy House, the library at Pemberley, and the library at Netherfield." She laughed. "Do you enjoy any rooms that are not libraries?" He shrugged. "My study, both at Pemberley and Darcy House, are quite comfortable, as are my rooms in both places." "No drawing rooms?" There was still a teasing tone to her voice. "I do not mind them, but if I had to choose between a drawing room filled with people and a well-stocked library, I would choose the library. I am not well versed in the art of conversation. It is not something that comes easily to me." "I do not believe that for a moment," Elizabeth retorted. Her breath caught, and whatever she was going to add to her rebuttal was snatched from her mind as she glimpsed the sight which lay beyond the door he was opening. "Oh, how beautiful!" "You see why it is a favourite, then?" "Indeed I do." 2 walls were lined with shelves of books which reached from the floor to the ceiling. One set of shelves was interrupted by a door that Darcy told her led to his uncle's study, while the other vast expanse of volumes was broken up by 2 windows evenly spaced. On the far end of the room, and only a short distance from the door to Lord Matlock's study, was a grouping of 2 chairs and a small sofa, with a low table standing before a fireplace. In the midst of the room were more chairs, a table, a globe, and a few other cabinets and furnishings, all neatly arranged. "This," Darcy said as he led her toward the fireplace, "is my favourite place to sit. Richard and I have spent a great deal of time in discussions here." He smiled at the memory. "Uncle Henry often joins us and shares his wisdom. Would you prefer to sit in a chair or on the sofa?" He had stopped in front of the sofa and wished to pull her down onto it beside him, but he could not bring himself to be so presumptuous. "The sofa will be perfect," she replied with a smile. "It is where you wish to sit, is it not?" "It is," he admitted. "I'd hoped you would sit with me." "And I shall." She took a seat and gave the cushion on her right a pat, inviting him to be seated. "Before we entered, you said you did not believe I struggle with conversation." He had always felt awkward in drawing rooms. It was a fact that was painfully obvious to all on many occasions. Therefore, he was curious to hear her explanation of her claim. "You converse very well, sir, when you are at ease," she said with a smile. "Why, today, at my aunt's house, you did not stumble once, and I would venture a guess that you are rarely without something to say when at Mrs. Verity's. The children would not be so comfortable around you if you were not also comfortable. And this evening you have carried on a great deal of conversation, both in the dining room and the drawing room. Therefore I suggest that it is not conversation skills which you lack, but rather the ability to feel at ease in unfamiliar places and with unfamiliar people." He shook his head, as a smile spread across his face. She was right, of course. If he looked at it as she was, he had to admit it was a lack of feeling at ease. That seemed to tie his tongue. "While I will allow you to be correct, I cannot say you have been completely thorough in your evaluation." "Have I not?" Her knee brushed against his leg as she turned toward him. "No," he said, taking her hand. "There are people such as my Aunt Catherine, who are not strange to me, nor is her house unfamiliar. Yet I am as unable to speak in her presence as I was at the assembly in Meryton. I fear that I am rather arrogant when I am at Rosings." "She makes you uneasy?" He nodded. "She is demanding, and she expects me to marry my cousin." His brow furrowed and his eyes filled with concern as he mentioned it. "I am not betrothed to her." "I know, Lord Matlock told me, but—" Her gaze dropped to the hand that was clasped in his. "I had already heard of your betrothal from both my cousin Mr. Collins and Mr. Wickham." And yet you have given me leave to call on you without asking me if it was true." She looked up at him. "It was not true. I knew that." Her eyes dropped to her hand again. "After hearing your sister's tale when she called, and then learning what you did for Nellie and the others at Mrs. Verity's, there was absolutely no trace of doubt about your character left in my mind. You are among the best of men. You would not call on one lady while being promised to another." "I would not place myself there," he said, though his heart thrilled to hear her say it. He still felt woefully inadequate at times, especially when he considered Georgiana's ordeal. "That is just it," she replied. "The best of men never place themselves in such a category. The scoundrels and rogues attempt it, but never those who truly deserve such a title." "Thank you," he whispered, unsure of what else to say to such a thing. "I apologize. I have made you uncomfortable." He looked at her in surprise. How did she know that? "You have fallen silent," she whispered. He chuckled. "I have I not? And now, when my heart is so full that it feels as if it will burst from my chest." He lifted her hand and brushed his lips against her knuckles. "I cannot express to you how delighted I am to hear I have won your good opinion. You have long had mine, but it deepens upon each meeting. You are the most handsome lady I have ever met, and not just because of your beauty. Your heart, your integrity, your truthfulness, all that is you, cannot now or ever be overshone by another." He lifted her chin to raise her eyes, which had once again lowered to look at her hand, and gazed for a brief moment on her flushed cheeks and her eyes that shone with happiness. "I love you, and would like to speak to your father when I am in Hertfordshire." He cupped her rosy cheek in his hand. "Do I have your permission to ask him for your hand?" A smile spread across her face as she nodded her consent. "You would have me?" Again she nodded. "If you will have me." "I should like nothing better," he replied. There was one more thing he wished to know. "Do you love me?" "Yes," she answered, before he could even draw an anxious breath. "You love me." The words settled in around his heart, wrapping it in a comforting peace that he had never before felt. She nodded. Very much. So very, very much. She loved him. The words proclaimed themselves loudly in his mind. She loved him. "May I kiss you?" he asked in a voice that was barely above a whisper. She saw the longing in his eyes as well as the uncertainty. Such a loving look could not be met with anything less than a willing acquiescence. Leaning forward, he gently brushed her lips with his. Then, pausing to make certain she was not startled or uneasy, he whispered, "I love you," before claiming her lips in a kiss that both left no doubt in her mind as to the truth of his words, and compelled her to respond in kind.